For me, Afrofuturism is a celebration of the Black experience, looking at our past, understanding our present, and having predictions for our future.
I think that a lot of Afrofuturism for me is like, yes, it's the possibilities and like the limitlessness, but also like where the present can like help us get to that point. Like it's not something that is like just like ideal utopic kind of idea. Like we actually, like maybe it is a utopia, but more hopefully it's something that's actually like viable, something that we can actually end up doing. Yeah. And that's where I feel like I get like lost in those kind of stories where it feels far enough that it feels very futurist, but also it's close enough that I could see like, oh, if we can do X, Y, Z, maybe this could happen.
Hi, Portia.
Hey, Tia.
I'm so happy to sit here and talk with you today about our experiences, masking and fandom and all that.
Yeah, I'm loving having another person who's into fandom as heavier than I am in this space. It's really fun.
Yeah. You know, it's fun being a nerd, huh?
I mean, if you're doing it right, yeah.
So how do you do? How does one be a nerd in the right way?
Right. Like, I'm not policing nerddom, but I'm like, hopefully you're in a fandom space because you want to have fun, because it's like something that brings you joy and you want to be around other people who are geeking out just as heavy and are just as enthused about the thing as you are. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're coming into a space because you want to gatekeep and police, to me, that's not the right way to be, because it takes the joy and the energy. It sucks it out. You become a vampire of your own like battery in a way. So I can imagine that would be fun. I wouldn't have fun doing that. I'm not a hate watcher, so that would never occur to me. How about you?
For me, I don't know. It's like, I guess I have to think about why I entered the space in the first place and how I got there. I am intentional about joy. I've always been very intentional about joy. And initially I saw joy as resistance to whatever type of biases or tropes or exploitation or racism, patriarchy that exists. Joy was my armor. And so when I learned of a group of women in New Orleans that are masking as Women of Wakanda, I was like, this is kind of powerful, right? And I enjoy moving into that space so I can find a community of women that were about it, Mm-hmm. And that was my first experience in New Orleans, but I had always masked when I was in Trinidad, and I lived in Trinidad for some time, and played Moss in their carnival. And it's just a way of feeling when you hit that pavement and you're on the road and you're disrupting the space, it is exhilarating. It is joy-filled for me. And that's something that I really, really like to engage with. What about you?
I mean, first off, I just need you to explain what masking is, because I think it's just like one of the first times I've ever like learned about.
Okay, sure enough. So masking is like when you're putting on a mask, you're putting on a costume, and in different geographies it looks different. And when I was playing Moss in Trinidad, it was more of a costuming of I would say bikini and feathers and beads.
Like the carnival.
Carnival with the beautiful, lovely feathers and colors and the boldness of that, right? And the beads and so on, and the designs. And it was a celebration of I don't know, your body in a way. Some people would train in the gym, but even you didn't have to fit into a certain norm. You just had to be and to be present and enjoy the soca, enjoy the music, and enjoy that fun. So that's what masking is. But in New Orleans, it looks a little bit different, right? You may have the bikinis and the beads for some costumes, but for Women of Wakanda, it was paying respect to and homage to Black Panther, right?
So like Dora Milaje.
Yes, exactly. But the difference is that it's how we imagine ourselves if we were to be a part of Wakanda, right? So you have this playfulness of your own imagination, of your own innovation, of if I were in this space, what would I wear? How would I present myself? What does that look like? And for me, that was where the creativity came on stream. Yeah. So that's masking.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful because being very like into like fandom, that seems to say sounds a lot similar to what I see as like cosplay and like fandom, and also like fanfic to an extent, like in role playing and like self-insert into the world that you like are interested in, and I know that a lot of fan fiction, like online and offline, is all about like trying to imagine yourself if were you to enter that world, and I know that cosplay is an extension of that, and sometimes they're cosplaying a specific character and sometimes they're cosplaying a person they wish they would be were they to enter that world. And I've always found that immensely like I love it. I love to see it. I enjoy seeing it. But like the level of like work and like technique that is brought to that is so informed, and I do not have the patience or wherewithal to put like I find them amazing, but I would never be a cosplayer because that takes so much like hard skill, talent, and time on that my bird brain, I will just flit off to another thing. I could not stick on a cosplay.
Yeah, it's like the best part about play, I think, is the space to dance in your imagination. And when you are putting on a costume, there's two things I think that's happening simultaneously. One, that there's a veil, but you get to be very vulnerable in the same space, right? You may have this costume on and you become whatever it is you're going to become, right? You emerge into and you step into that power. But at the same time, it could be your true self that you're portraying, right? That the world doesn't allow you to be. Right? Whether that's free, whether that's, bold, whether that's loud, because very often we're silenced in different spaces. But when you have this sense of play, particularly if you're playing, out in public and out in spaces where they say, no, you shouldn't do that, or there's gaze upon you, right? You're just stepping into that space where you could just be who you are, but with that mask on. And then when you take the mask off, it's like, okay, let me go back into myself, however that is. So it's a really contradictory, interesting space to be in that I really like.
Yeah, I think there's a level of that, like from my experience in fandom, I wouldn't say that like I had masked myself. I have always been a nerd. I've always been really into books, and I was always a voracious reader. There was like one fandom that I kind of was into because I just enjoyed that world so much. But I'd never lived it out or like did anything related to it because I wasn't around the people who had that same that share energy with me, like for that space, for that fandom, until I got older. And then I learned of podcasts of Black people talking about that fandom. And then I was like, oh, there's more. I'm like, I knew there was more, but I didn't know how to connect with them. And I could connect with them easily because it's in the day of like peak podcast interaction via like Twitter and like listening along and then replying and answering on there. So it became like, oh, I can talk to these people and we're talking back and we're sharing like this energy and joy about this fandom together in this online space. And it was outside of just listening, isn't being part of the discussion as well. And in doing that, I don't know that I was masking before, but I definitely did not make it as part of my personality as much, because I'm like, you never know, like, people are going to like say something snide or whatever about you being into a thing. And it's like, there's no point of like taking on that like extra level of like negativity of like someone responding to you for something if you're not actively living that thing every day. But then when I got more into fandom and became part of the podcast, it was like, oh, well, we can, like, I can't wait till we can meet up and we can all do this together. And that's whenever it was kind of like, I don't know if we'd categorize it as unmasking or whatever, but some people are cosplaying. Some people, like me, I just like had like the clothes and the colors of like the house that I belong to, you know, put multiple outfits together. I'm going to wear a fascinator one day and do something else. And that became freeing and like liberatory in a way. But then that fandom also had issues with the creator, and like, you don't want to like put energy behind something. Even if it like brought you joy in that way, it's not worth like stepping on someone else's like life and their identity in order to maintain your like period of joy. So like we found other ways of like being able to maintain that podcast space and talk about magical worlds, but focus them more on like Black fantasy worlds. And I think that what's been great about like seeing more popularity behind like fantasy and what that looks like even within like dominant franchises and culture like Game of Thrones or whatever, we also get a Wakanda from like Marvel. And that means that it's not so like offbeat to hear about like what is Afrofuturism, like Wakanda kind of like introduces it, but you don't really quite have like a whole complete idea of that. And I love that as time has gone on and the more that we see these bigger franchises pick it up, we get to see more iterations of like what Afrofuturism means to different people and how they interpret it. How do you interpret Afrofuturism?
For me, Afrofuturism is a celebration of the Black experience, looking at our past, understanding our present, and having predictions for our future, right? And I may say it clumsy, but that is how I engage with it, right? And to be able to imagine a future where I'm not talking about pain or suffering or this victim stories. I'm like living in joy and peace and harmony. I am a part of the future. Black people are a part of the future. Black women in particular are a part of the future. It's not even brought into question. So that to me is thinking about ways in which the Black experience is sustained, right? And I think I know, as I'm playing in these this masquerade bands and things like that, that becomes an experience of the possibilities of, what if we do this? What if we innovate that? How are we going to create joy and those types of things. So that is how I engage with Afrofuturism. And of course, there's textbook definitions of how things are and talking about Black art, music, philosophy, literature, and things like that, and how we write about it. So, and that is definitely a big, large part of the collective themes around Afrofuturism. But for me as an individual experience, it is centered in joy. It is centered in innovation, and it's centered in our future and our sustainability, to be present.
Yeah. I think it's sorry, but I'm going to, these words are like one of my favorite phrasings of this word, like your presence is a present. And to be like present in time and to like be able to like take on, like there's a reason why like Black people who like have a pride and a level of like where we feel called to always bring in the past into things is because we're like, there's a level of like, we grew from that. We like the people who had to survive in order for us to be here, went through all that stuff. And the least I can do is to like put respect on their name and then bring them with me as I'm doing the things. So I think that a lot of Afrofuturism for me is like, yes, it's the possibilities and like the like limitlessness, but also like where the present can like help us get to that point. Like it's not something that is like just like ideal utopic kind of idea. Like we actually, like maybe it is a utopia, but hopefully it's something that's actually like viable, something that we can actually end up doing. And that's where I feel like I get like lost in those kind of stories where it feels far enough that it feels very futurist, but also it's close enough that I could see like, oh, if we can do XYZ, maybe this could happen. Those are kind of like my favorite stories. And I think some of the stories that I've seen resonate pretty well with people. Like they can see a bit of themselves in it because it's enough, like it touches on the present enough to make, like I'm thinking about Andor. It's not Afrofuturist, but it is like a futuristic society. And it is very anti-fascist in that like it's a very cool way of invoking this idea of like what the world would look like were we to be more accountable to anti-fascism, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's the significance of play for me. That if you watch children play and their imagination just soars, right? And sometimes as we get older, we lose that ability to play. Or that, I have other responsibilities and play gets put on the back burner. But to me, play is a way where I innovate, where I imagine. And so if I can imagine it, then we can become it. I think play allows for that space to kind of imagine a world where the things that we fight and the things that we are in our work, in our daily work at the Opportunity Agenda, right? As a social justice communications lab, right? We're in the space. And if I cannot imagine no patriarchy, no homophobia, no white supremacy, if I can't even imagine that as a possibility, what am I doing? What am I doing?
What kind of world are you trying to build? What are you trying to live in?
So I need spaces to play so I can figure it out. Like, okay, this is what I can do. Or maybe this narrative, or maybe this strategy. This is where the ideas come to me in play. And I think that when you watch children, that's where their ideas come. And then the hierarchy comes in, right? And this is where you have to unlearn a lot of things that sometimes play, if that structure play brings. So, yeah, man.
I was thinking about when you said about if you see it, then you can do it, you can believe it, you can achieve it kind of thing.
Sounds like a high school.
Right. It's like a song. No, the children know the future. But I think that for me, I'm thinking about like level of representation, like what role representation plays in like that and like being able to like see yourself and things. And it's interesting because I feel like this is a discourse that I keep see happen is about being Black, period, probably, but I'm going to speak about being a Black American, is that like grow up with like images of primarily like white faces in your television, in life, having like larger role, like in the managerial or like higher positions. And so you kind of get an idea of like who gets those roles, what does that look like, and what that means for you is probably like you're probably not going to end up there. But it's really cool being able to see more and more as time goes by, more and more representation, not only in the day-to-day lives of people of color, but Black people specifically being in those positions of power, but also on television, seeing like levels of representation. So like it was really cool, like that whole like loving fandom and being able to bring in that idea of like, representation that I've been able to get and be enthusiastic about in like fandom can also bring to the work that I do at the Opportunity Agenda with Power of Pop. Because they had done a report before I came in on the representation of immigrants in television. And I was really happy and excited to do one about like people of socioeconomic status and what that looked like on television. And it's like ties in with like, what do you think a high-powered role or like high-paying role on television, like how much do you think that person is making versus like their real-world counterparts? And like the propaganda is real strong and their salaries are equally strong in real life, and how that's like ridiculous. But then also like the cool stuff, like I know like we did a discussion on like Abbott Elementary with some authors about like showcasing this is an underfunded school in Philadelphia, and there are plenty underfunded schools in Philadelphia, but like the people who are on the ground and doing the work are very invested in that. And so it's like seeing that reflection of like people are invested in the future of the kids that they're in front of, but like each other, like we're invested in each other. And that's like so gratifying as a representation that to see, that I think that it really plays into a lot of like I don't know, just like that extra layer of like support or softness that you need when you're in play. Because yeah, you can play hard, you can play rough, but there's a level of like actually working out what is like being able to be your full self in a space mean. And that means being vulnerable, right? And I think that Abbott Elementary is kind of like one of the softest, but also kind of like hard-hitting shows I've seen in a while that does that.
Yeah. I think you touched on something when you talked about representation and the significance of representation. And whether it's in television, literature, schools, even having Black professors. I mean, I've been a teacher for a long time, and I have many students that say, wow, I'm so happy I have a Black teacher. Some of my students have gone through maybe to their junior year and never had a Black professor till they came upon me. Like, oh, so you're in the room. Like, yeah, man. It's kind of nice to see the possibility. Right. But the thing about representation that's very, very important for those people that are in the space that have the power is that we can't just be the singular one. We definitely have to say, hey, I'm not the only. I don't want to be the only. That's not the end game.
No.
Because the future requires to bring everyone. The future requires collectivity. The future requires community, right? And so I think that too needs to be something like a through line to continue with that representation, but continue to bring people on board, to continue to bring different ethnicities and races and experiences and showcase that so that we can understand humanity.
Right.
And not say, this is what American means.
Yeah.
This is what it means to be American. Well, what does that really mean? Because when you step outside of the United States, and I have my passport, maybe it's an American passport, but as I'm moving through these different countries, and I mean,
they're not seeing your passport whenever.
No, they're not seeing, but they're like, well, where is she from? But then I have to speak. Like, oh, you speak English. Okay, well, what kind of...
With a specific accent, right?
From a local place, for this geography. So who are you really, right? And so that's one of the things I love about being Black, is that I can go into different places and like, oh, are you from here? That type of thing. But yeah.
I think that's cool. I think that's about like when you're bringing out thoughts for me about like community and culture, like, and like why like representation outside of just one individual is important, because if you say you're open to diversity or to like equity and things, and that means you're open to like the representation of culture in that environment in the way that it shows up in the real world, right?
Yeah.
So you can't have culture with one person. You have culture with the community. And that's why that's like a strong, like compelling place. Because a compelling place, it brings in more people, and more people are able to be themselves and unmask and like bring their full selves to the table. And that leads to such interesting inroads. And I think since we're both researchers, I think there's a level of curiosity that we naturally have.
Curiosity.
Where you're just like, being the establishment and being around people from different sexualities, from different abilities, different ways of life and understandings of the world. You're just like curious, there's so many different examples of how the world is such a cool place and people are such cool people. And you only really get that understanding and are only able to like grow and gain like better insight to how you want to be in the world when you're like exposing yourself and like continuing like to like want to be in community with other people. And I found that like a fandom is a really good place for that, because you're all kind of coming together because there's joy that you hold for this thing, and but your interpretation of that joy is going to be so varied depending on where that comes from. Have you found that at all in the work that you've been doing around, well, any of the like stuff that you've done for fun?
Yeah, I would say yes, because one of the things that you touched on that I kind of want to bring back into this moment is the idea of community and collectivity and knowing where you want to fit in those things, right? But what I've learned is that even identity is a journey, right? Sometimes I don't know what I want to be, right? Or sometimes even, I have my own story, but I don't know how I want to share it. Or if I do want to share it.
Or which part of it
which part of it was like, oh, I don't want to talk about that right now, but maybe later I'll have the confidence or or the necessity to share.
Or the space will feel safe enough for me to
the safety of it is so significant. Yeah, you're right about that. And it talks about it reminds me of this idea of cultural strategies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, what cultural strategies is the ability to create access, to be able to interrogate through art, through literature, through give me some stuff. Art, literature,
entertainment, but also like dance, like just, what does that like look like?
Yeah, it's like culture, using culture as a way to access and to critique and to challenge and to embrace joy. So using culture as a strategy to even make a statement about something, right? And it can be so powerful and translate across many different audiences, right? And I think that is the beauty of masking. That is the beauty of fandom, that it translates, right? Even if people look, it's like, what are they doing? That looks weird. But you're looking and you're curious. So we got your attention, right? So it's a beautiful way to play that is accessible to all.
Yeah, I think about when you say that, that reminds me of like K-pop, for instance. Like K-pop could not be K-pop without like 90s R&B and like all the dance.
Damn, Skippy.
Yeah, but also do you know how many choreographers who like left, like Black choreographers who left the US, went to Korea and have been teaching like these like K-pop groups how to like do these dances.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to me, like the appreciation of it all, and like how that continues to resonate. Like 90s happened, sadly. I was in my young years then, so like I don't even have that bigger nostalgia of like being an adult and knowing how the world was vibing in the 90s. But I know like from my younger perspective what it felt like. And it's like, sadly, the 90s were so long ago, quote unquote so long, but but they continue on like to this day. Like we still like have some of the same vibes that I think bring that nostalgia, or like being reinterpreted and like brought forward in multiple ways. And then you see a K-pop group do it, but then you see there was like a competition show that I did not watch at all in full, but watched on TikTok, where there were like a group of dance members who came from different countries, and including like there was a Black American dancer and some other dancers of color who were all like teamed up in a super group together, and they were doing like K-pop dance challenge, and they did really cool, awesome stuff. And just seeing that level of like interpretation and reinterpolation and just doing it over and over again, and like for a genre that has grown in prominence around the world, like K-pop. It used to be more localized, and now we're kind of seeing more of how it's become a global brand and strategy. I think that sharing of culture kind of thing, like it could not have happened without that sharing of culture and that appreciation to be like moving off of each other in that way.
Yeah, and I think you hit it when you say appreciation of culture, not exploitation of it, not exploitation of it, but appreciation of culture, where it's shared. And it's also celebrated.
Yeah, not to say that K-pop doesn't have people have exploited.
We're not saying that. But the idea of using that as an example that we can share culture. It doesn't mean you have to take it on and exploit it and commercialize it and all that stuff. I'm not saying that, and I'm not advocating for that. And that does very much happen in a capitalist system, right?
It does.
And it happens, but we could use culture as a baseline to begin to have these conversations that sometimes are uncomfortable. And we can use play and culture to kind of engage those things like, oh, how do you do that? But we have to be open and willing to have those conversations. And very often, sometimes we cut those things off because in the past, there has been a lot of mistrust.
And it's like valid distrust.
Valid mistrust of you taking my stuff and using it for your own benefit and not giving me some type of validation or credit for teaching you. Right. And that becomes very problematic. And now we're back at the same spot, right? But we're talking about ways in which to use culture as strategically to invite people into the conversation, to have those difficult conversations so that we can move forward to create and be in the world in which we live in a multiracial democracy, right? Where people feel affirmed, respected, appreciated, a part of humanity, right?
Right. It's like, so even someone who's like, I'm going to stay on K-pop reference, but, and this is, again, I barely know any bands, but I'm thinking about like, even like someone who just dances alone in their house should have like a decent amount of like weight in the world when they want to make their voice heard. And we think about democracy, I think, very like governmentally and like what it should be under this like dictionary term and definition, or we think about it as like, oh, democracy equals voting because we've been told over and over again that democracy equals voting. But thinking about like this like dancer, I'm thinking about like someone I've seen on TikTok who was dancing in public to a K-pop song and just was like grooving in public and dancing, and then suddenly someone else pops up along with them and they're doing the same dance together, and she did not expect for someone to be joining into the dance. They just like came in and they did it. And
it wasn't like a flash mob.
It wasn't a flash mob. They was just like someone, like she was in a public space. It was like just dancing to the song on video. Someone walks by and it's like, oh, I know the choreography for this, and they join in, and it becomes this really joyful celebration of like, we're in like our love for this thing shows no bounds. I will show out in public with you, and it's like love this thing together. And to me, that's like an ideal kind of like way of thinking about democracy, of like that been viral. Their friendship went viral. They built a friendship out of that, like one time encounter, you have on the street. And people are just as interested in like how their friendship, or their dancing, what that looks like going forward for them. As I think like even the dance group and the band was that like put out the video and song and had like popularized the whole choreography and everything. So I think there's like a level of like, if you think of democracy as being something that like even like a drop in a pebble, like some one person alone on the street can garner like as much attention and like change, or different, like we're thinking about democracy as a change, but difference, and like use culture to kind of like start that conversation. You really start thinking about like, yeah, but there are like, I'm not the only one that probably feels this way about a thing. Sometimes I just need to be the person in public dancing by myself, and then someone else will come in and join me, and then we're not alone anymore.
Yeah, it's like the art becomes the way we connect. Art is the language, right?
Yeah.
It's the language that we both share.
Yeah.
It's something we understand together. And as we dance together, we can then grow.
And the dance changes because we added to it.
The rhythm changes, the space may change, the outfit, the vibe. So yeah, that's pretty cool, Portia. This is on TikTok?
TikTok.
I don't have TikTok, but okay. And let me full disclosure, I never really I kind of don't know what K-pop is,
Korean,
but I kind of I do know that part.
Yeah,
but I'm not like, I don't know like the dance moves or anything like that. Is it like New Edition
type of stuff? It's like if New Edition and Janet Jackson like popped on, like there's some bands that are more like we're doing like rap, like there's like a band of like 8 guys and one of them is the rapper, or maybe 2 of them are the rappers. So like everyone's like doing choreo that's like very reminiscent of like Janet, and then you get like the rapper comes out and then he's doing like hip hop swag. It's a mood. You have to be in the mood.
I have to watch that because I'm feeling it right now.
Right. But there is also on TikTok that I've seen, there's like a black choreographer, I forget her name, but she's become like more like one of the K-pop members like is always like hanging out with her, and their friendship has become this like TikTok thing. So I think you might like if you saw like the choreographer, how she's like she's married to someone I think who's Korean, and so she knows the language, but part of the language with her is like the language is her body movement, and so she ends up, so the conversations and hangouts they always end up like doing something together and like learning from each other because it's like fun. Like that's how they communicate, is through body movement.
Oh.
Not that way, body movement.
Yeah, I mean my head was focused. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I think that's cool, and I think there's space for me to learn about that and to get on TikTok.
I mean, you don't have to.
Or at least I can look at your TikTok and you can show.
I'll share videos with you. I'll bring you in slowly.
Yeah. So as we're talking about the impact of fandom and masking and play in social justice. What are some like lasting things that we could share, you think, with folk?
Don't want to leave this discussion where I'm bringing up fandom without showcasing like, or talking a little bit about like why fandom may not necessarily be the place that you like, you know, may have valid reasons for thinking of this way, but as being like this like Gamergate guy in a basement loving a thing kind of thing. There are like organizations like I like plug about like Fandom Forward that I've worked with and Black Nerds Create, where the work is more about like being involved together and like branching forward and like actively doing like campaigns that are for like people who want better things in the world to happen through their fandom, and using the language of love that they have for the fandom to bring in like the love and change they want to see in the world. And I think, again, when you're working with the community of really engaged people who are really engaged about the same thing you are, then it leads to some real cool stuff. And part of the Fandom Forward work and Black Nerds Create work has been with a fandom coalition. So we've been talking to fans from like Star Trek, fans from like Real Housewives of the Real Housewives franchise in general, and how they've used their strategies and like work and building like networks with like Percy Jackson fans who tend to be like younger than some of our other fandom groups. And it's led to really cool like co-organizing structure and understanding of like, how do we target the white supremacy we see in our fandom so that it doesn't like take over and isn't overpowering to the work we're trying to do and like the people that we are. Not to say like Star Wars fandom is primarily toxic. I would not touch it with a 2-foot pole. I only like talk to other Star Wars fans that I know that are part of other fandoms because I just know them through there. I understand that like reticence to like get involved in that stuff. I am too, but I would like also to broadcast that there are like safe spaces in fandom where you don't have to run into people trolling you. That is something that you can definitely do and find people who maybe you're not like inclined to be protesting in the street, but perhaps you're like down to like write a letter to your city council. And you know, that's a step that does more than you think it doesn't. So I love that about that work. And hopefully that's something that like people are interested in.
Yeah, and it's accessible too.
Yeah.
It's really, really accessible. So I think that's a good way to close out and to remind folk that, you know, what you and I are talking about right now is ways in which we express joy, ways in which we protest, ways in which we share and we critique and understand our world and how we negotiate our way through it, right? And I think everybody has their own vibe of how they do that. And I'm just happy to sit down and talk with you about, you know, a fellow researcher and colleague who I admire. You know, who's very fly.
Very mutual.
He always has the best nails. Got it done, all beat, you know, all great. And I just very much enjoyed this conversation. So hopefully, you know, we could talk again sometime soon.
Of course. It's all like, as long as we're having a celebration, you know, as long as Stevie Wonder's playing somewhere, we're there.
Who? Stevie Wonder?
Yeah. That's a celebration, man.
Yeah, that's very true.